Now,
for the city of
here on our site, we have to go
The
back to the year of
DNA boss of the
1840.
name.
This area was
Really?
known as Slocum Hollow, Pennsylvania. This consisted of no more than 10 dwellings, a couple of one inn, a schoolhouse, and a couple of mills. Now, two brothers would come to this area. Their names were Joseph and Selden. Joseph and good Lord, George and Selden. I'm sorry. George and Selden came here looking for two things. They were looking for iron ore and they were looking for coal. Well, they found plenty of coal underneath our feet, but not so much iron. Regardless, they'll open up their iron furnace along what we call the Nayog Creek or Roaring Brook. They didn't make a lot of money at this time because they were making very small products such as ingots and nails, and well, their markets were down in Philadelphia and New York City. There were no good roads and no real great way to get there, so they had to really sell to the local market more. However, they would find a new business venture up across those mountains behind you up in New York State. In the area of Binghamton, New York, the Erie Railroad was making their way west from New York City to Buffalo. They had one problem though. They were getting their rails from England. This was very expensive and took a long time for those rails to ship across the ocean. As such, these brothers went to the Erie Railroad and they said, let us make your rails for you. We'll do it cheaper and we'll do it faster. So, they will begin making rails here in Slocum Hollow, but once again they had the same issue. How do you get your product to market? Well, for the brothers, the answer was simple. Let's make our own railroad. We're already making rails, we might as well put them down. So they'll begin putting rails down, buying two railroads in the area called the Cobb's Gap Railroad and the Liggett's Gap Railroad, and in 1851 the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad was born. Originally created to service the Erie Railroad and eventually become one of the Erie's greatest competitors. Oh yeah, so those two brothers, George and Selden, that was the Scranton family. George and Selden Scranton would eventually get into the railroading industry here after first getting into the iron industry, and eventually after they moved on, their railroad industry would get into the coal mining industry. The rail yard that we currently sit on top of was established in the 1850s, and we are at the second of two roundhouses. The first roundhouse was built in 1854, and the roundhouse that we are currently standing in was built in 1865, shortly after the American Civil War. This was a 46-bay roundhouse, so from track one behind you, going all the way behind me, and behind you again to where our visitor center is, would have all been bays for the roundhouse. There were only two tracks in and out, one of them being where 2124 is on the track here. Now, this was a gypsy loop of the railroad world. After every single run, locomotives would be brought in here to be inspected and maintained. Very early on, this roundhouse was a small roundhouse. If you've ever visited the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum, it was much akin to that. It had a roof over our heads here with the turntable in the center. By 1902, however, the technology became too large for the roundhouse. In 1865, we're maintaining locomotives about the size of the engines that you see in John Wayne films, but by 1902, we have engines about the size of 790 over here. So in order to make more room for these locomotives, they will take the roundhouse walls and tear them down. They will once again rebuild into a 46-bay roundhouse, this time without the roof, and they will put in a 90-foot turntable, the current length of our turntable today. Going into the 1930s, however, technology once again has become too large for the roundhouse. This time, instead of demolishing the entire roundhouse because they realized that was expensive, they're going to simply build off its back walls. Today we have bays 8, 9, and 10 over here to your left that remains of the 1902 footprint of our roundhouse, while bays 13 through 25 behind me and behind the locomotive going all the way around were what remains of the 1937 roundhouse. So for my tour group, we're going to move over to track 12 and we're going to talk a little bit more about that expansion. So for those of you on my tour, my 30, please follow me.
You open that?
Alright, the reason why I'm bringing them all over here is for the walls themselves. As I previously mentioned, this is the 1902 section of the roundhouse that still remains. Behind me is the 1937 section of the roundhouse. You can take a look at the older brick work of the 1902 section, and you'll notice that it is distinctively smaller than the 1937 section. To get put in perspective of how much the size of the locomotives changed, take a quick look over 1, 2, 3 windows, and that's of course in 1902. Now, for 1937 and that expansion, if you start over my head where the roof line here is, and you go 1, 2 windows, you'll see a bump up in that roof line. That bump up is where the 1902 section ends and the 1937 section begins. That tells you just how much larger the steam locomotives were becoming going into the steam era. Also, a little architectural thing about our museums that not a lot of people know. When you go back out and walk through the center of the complex here, you'll notice that there are these bricks on there. Where you see the red bricks in the center of our complex denotes where the walls of the roundhouse would have once been. That's not something that a lot of people know, so when you get off our tour today, take a look and see if you can find where those walls used to be. Now, as I had previously mentioned, this was a Jiffy Lube of the railroad world. This was that quick maintenance area. After every run, so let's say in the 1920s, every 100 miles or so, trains would come into the roundhouse to be maintained. This was a very quick inspection, looking at bolts and lubrication in particular, and then looking for anything else that might be needed to take care of as well. They'll come into the foreman's office. The foreman will ask the engineer, what's wrong with your train today? The engineer will say everything, it's a steam locomotive. So after they go through a checklist of, is it a basic inspection, is it a little bit more major, they will assign the locomotive to a stall, just like a auto garage where some of your stalls have things that can be done more than other stalls or different types of work to be done. That was kind of the same here. Most of them could do basic inspection, but some of them had some extra tools or some people who had some extra skills if they needed them. So today our foreman is going to tell us that we're going to go to Bay 18. They're going to pull the locomotive onto the turntable, spin it around, and pull it in. So our next stop, we're going to step inside the 1937 roundhouse and talk a little bit more about the work being done in there. Please follow me.
Not parallel.